Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is my review of the C&H Precision V4 Glock MOS plate. Talked about it before. The biggest failing of the Glock MOS platform is the OEM plate system. They're not super durable, they're very brittle, and they're prone to breakage, and they're prone to some other issues that we get basically because of the thickness and the fact that they can come right out of the package with a slight warp to them. Not guaranteed, but it's something I've seen happen enough that I do not recommend that people use the Glock MOS plate, the OEM plate that comes with the MOS, if you're going to use or have to use the MOS platform. Because of that, we have to seek aftermarket options. So something I've been working on is going through all of the aftermarket options that are out there. Now, I have reviewed a plate from C&H Precision before. However, this is my first look, 2,000 round review on their V4 plate. As far as plates go, there is one thing that definitely sets this plate apart from some of the other plates that are out there. And that's the fact that the T-posts are replaceable, just like they are on C&H Precision's polymer plates. If I strip a screw out or something like that, it's not a big deal. I can order a replacement kit from C&H Precision, or maybe order one just in case, because depending on what kind of thread lockers you use, and if you're mounting, especially if you're mounting an RMR, you're gonna have to take that optic off the gun at some point to replace the battery. If you happen to have put too much thread locker or the wrong thread locker on your mounting screws when you put the optic on in the first place, not something you're gonna remember doing probably a year down the road when you're replacing the battery. So you may strip a screw taking that thing out. No big deal. You can replace the T-post. You don't have to throw away the whole plate, which I found to be a very unique feature. As far as fences and gates, this is something that people talk about a lot, or they should, something they should definitely be concerned with their mounting plate. Does the optic have an actual shoe, or is it just sitting there with gapped space available? This is something that you see from some of the MOS plates. The optic just sits there, and it doesn't have a fence, or it backs up to the rear of the actual milled shoe to give the optic nowhere to go, so to speak, during recoil. We want to minimize the amount of energy that can be transferred to the optic body depending on or flexing against just screws or posts. So with this particular plate, it uses the rear of the cut as the rear fence, and then the plate has milled into it a front fence on the front end, so that just gives us a little bit more snug support to help mitigate the cumulative effects of recoil throughout the plate's life. What separates the V4 mill LEO plate from the V4 Defenders is the fact that it's not a polymer. If you go on the channel, you can find a review I did on their polymer plate. They don't really consider that to be a duty carry plate, although during the review I found that the durability is reliable enough that it wouldn't necessarily bother me. However, I would prefer and I would recommend that someone go after an aluminum or a steel plate for duty purposes rather than a polymer, even though I found in that video the polymer is very reliable and it maintains zero throughout the 2,000 round review process. But in this video we're talking specifically about their aluminum 6061 plate, which is kind of the latest generation of plates that they've been producing for a very long time. The first aftermarket plate I ever purchased for an MOS was a C&H Precision. I got one for an RMR, and I also had one that I needed for a review of some Vortex optics, and I found them to be very durable and very reliable, even though for those purposes I wasn't looking specifically at the plate. I was pleasantly surprised to find that they allowed me to progress through an optic review without any plate-related problems coming up. So what is the 2,000 round review process? Most of you are probably familiar with this, but some of you might not be. I'm going to do 2,000 rounds throughout the process of the review. The very first thing I'm going to do, once I get the plate mounted, is a 500 round burn down. Now the reason I do this burn down is because I want to accelerate the frequency of fire. So a problem may develop in a short period of time over 500 rounds versus that same 500 rounds fired over a period of hours or days or weeks or months or years. And because I have the ability to do so, and it's going to take things a little bit outside the realm of realism, 500 rounds, and usually it takes me about 3 to 4 minutes to fire those 500 rounds traditionally, but because I have the option to do so, I'm going to go ahead and do it on my auto sear. So yeah, this is going to be a burn down. So there you go, 500 rounds, a lot of full automatic fire in there, which is a little bit torturous for my Gen 5 Glock MOS that I use in my review platform. But I didn't have any problems develop, nothing loosened up, nothing weakened, no issues whatsoever. So after the burn down, I just used the plate on this Gen 5 17 MOS as I would normally, working it into my normal practice. That also includes one-handed manipulations. This is another place where plates can fail us. It's not something I advocate, and I say this in every video, and I probably always will, to manipulate the slide of the gun using the optic face unless you absolutely have to. One of those situations where you might want to think about doing that or practicing that is one-handed manipulations. If for whatever reason my other hand isn't available and I need to cycle the slide, I can use the optic face itself off of a barrier hard surface or my own personal gear to cycle that gun. Is that going to cause a zero shift? Is it going to cause any undue damage or shifting to the plate itself? Usually this doesn't become a problem, but because, you know, I want to do my due diligence, it's something I'm always going to include in the review process. And I found, just like with, as I would have expected, no issues developed whatsoever with the version 4 plate. As always, the big elephant in the room, this is what some people literally come here to see, is the drop testing. I do shoulder height drop tests. I do one drop test every 500 rounds. The reason I do the drop test, and again, something I'll probably put in every single video just for people who've never watched any of these before, isn't to assume that someone is going to drop their gun from a shoulder height. It's just a consistent height I can drop and deliver a consistent amount of shock to the gun in a somewhat scientific method in order to replicate the gun taking hard impact. This is something that I guess some people, they just focus on the actual act itself, and they don't think about why I would necessarily be doing it. Just recently I had a student of mine send me a text message and a photo of his duty gun and his duty optic that had been broken while it was in the holster. And this isn't the first time I've gotten a message like this, it's just the most recent. He'd been rolling around with a suspect in a parking lot on asphalt, and during the altercation, before he was able to get cuffs on the guy, gun never came out of the holster during the whole fight. Wasn't that kind of situation, but it was a fight. When it was over, he had a broken optic in his holster. This is the reason why I do the drop testing. For this particular situation, I'm not looking at the optic because I did mount an RMR for my review process. I'm pretty confident in the RMR's durability at this point, but I am checking the plate. I chose the RMR because I have more rounds on the RMR than any other pistol optic across more than one version or more than one RMR. I've got a couple different RMRs that have kind of ridiculous high round counts at this point. But the plate can fail because the plate is part of the system. It's not like I'm reviewing a milled gun, so I need to see if the plate is going to shift or crack or break or otherwise encounter any issues. So I do one drop test, like I said, every 500 rounds. Before we get into that, here's a 5-round group I fired for confirmation purposes after I zeroed the gun. 124 grain gold dot, fired from 25 yards. Then I just went about the whole review process, and every 500 rounds did a drop test. Here's your drop tests. After every drop test, I check the zero. Here is the zero check after the 4th drop test. I would consider that return to zero. So durability is definitely there. As far as features go, we're really just talking about a plate. And I kind of already talked about the features that really interested me in the plate and what I think is advantageous. Being able to replace the T-posts, that's a super cool feature. The fact that it has T-posts is also a super cool feature for some people who prefer that style of milling or plate, if you will. There's not a lot of technology you can put into a plate, but it's cool to see that Buck and the guys over at C&H actually thought about, okay, what can we make this more value added, if you will, for the end user? And being able to replace the T-post, it seems like this small little thing, but if it's such a small little thing, why didn't anybody else think of it before? And that's what makes me think that people over there are actually thinking about what's going into their plate design. That doesn't mean that this is the end-all be-all plate system that's out there. However, it's a great option if you're looking for a plate to replace the poor showing from the stock Glock MOS plate. Now, it'd be great if Glock would update that design in Gen 6 of the Glock or whatever, or just come out with a new plate that's not made out of metal injection molded cast metal, whatever you want to call it. It'd be very easy for them to do that. However, the aftermarket has already stepped in and is taking care of that problem for them, so maybe they feel like they don't have to. And that's okay, as long as you recognize that if you get a Glock MOS, you need an aftermarket plate. And the C&H Precision plates are definitely a great choice to fill that category. I'm going to give you a very simplistic plate that's very reasonable. And it's going to fit and have good fitment for the optic that you choose. Now, I used it in the RMR, but they have it available for other footprints, such as the Holosuns. And I'm sure as more optics become available, more plates will be available as well, because it's comparatively easy for them to produce a new plate footprint than it is, say, for you to remill a gun or pursue a different mounting solution. There's not much to it, and that's kind of what endears me to it. Now, the one thing that you might take away from this, and some people get a little bit spoiled, is it's not going to save you a great deal of height, and that's pretty much a restriction based on how deep the shoe is to begin with on the MOS. So in order to make sure the plate maintains a certain degree of strength, and the fact that it is made out of aluminum, it's still pretty thick, relatively speaking, but you're still going to get a good amount of thread contact down into the slide. This is something other people worry about. I worry about as well, especially with super thick, the Glock MOS slides, is only having 3, maybe 4 threads making contact into the slide of the gun, which can cause other problems with that particular style of plate. Not a problem I've noticed so far in the 2,000 round review process with this particular plate, and I definitely give it a pass, flying colors, if you will. It's a good, viable solution. No holster issues. This is something other people sometimes bring up, especially for duty carry. I use a 6350. No holster issues either. This is something that people need to be... Didn't have any holster compatibility issues. This is obviously something we want to talk about, since this is kind of geared for a duty carry gun, or just in general for MOSs. But I use both a DO model and an RDS model from Safariland as duty holsters for RDS handguns. No issues whatsoever. Compatibility it's there. The gun's going to lock in. It's going to be secure. Draw stroke's going to be fine, not unimpeded. And really, you'd kind of expect that, because it's pretty much a very similar presentation and profile to the stock OEM plate. And those holsters do give you, the RDS version, a little bit more than the DO model, give you a little bit room to play with as far as height goes on your optic. So if you own a Glock MOS and you haven't replaced your OEM plate yet, you definitely need to as soon as possible. And if you're going to replace it, definitely consider replacing it with the C&H Precision plate. I'm Aaron Count with C&H Dynamics. Train accordingly.